What is psychology? What is classical conditioning? And who invented the first IQ test? Let's find out. We're going to talk about the history of psychology. We could go all the way back to 500 BC and talk about how Confucius emphasized the importance of virtues and compare it to modern day clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson's similar emphasis on virtues in his new book. Or we could even talk about all the teachings about humanity from the important religious figures. Or look at the contributions of hundreds of famous philosophers over the last centuries. But where we will begin is Wilhelm Wundt. In the 1800s, he became the first person to officially open a lab for psychology research. Wilhelm Wundt is known as the father of experimental psychology. This is because in 1879, he founded the first formal laboratory for psychological research. He studied things such as memory and apperception. Apperception is how new experiences are assimilated and transformed by our past experiences and allow us to understand them. William James was known as the father of American psychology. He developed the James Lange theory of emotion, which states that emotion is the mind's perception of physiological conditions. For example, we see a bear and run. Consequently, we fear the bear. This theory posits that emotional states spring from physiological states. One of the first contributors to the psychological field known as behaviorism was Ivan Pavlov in 1901. He developed the concept of the conditional reflex by teaching dogs to salivate when hearing a bell. Classical conditioning is learning through association. In simple terms, two stimuli are linked together to produce a new learned response in a person or an animal. Here he can be seen in his early work in his laboratory. Pavlov would give the dogs food, which he termed an unconditioned stimulus, and he would observe the dog salivate, which he termed an unconditioned response. Later on, he would provide the dogs with a neutral stimulus, such as ringing a bell, and observed that the dogs did not salivate. Then he began his process of classical conditioning. He would first ring a bell and then immediately afterwards provide the dogs with food. And again, he noticed the dogs salivating, which was again an unconditioned response. After many repetitions of pairing the bell with the dog food, he attempted to ring the bell to see if the dogs would salivate. They did. Then he termed the ringing of the bell in this situation a conditioned stimulus, and the salivation of the dog as a conditioned response. Alfred Binet developed the first IQ test, which was known as the Binet-Simon scale. In 1905, the French Ministry of Education asked him to devise a method that would determine which students did not learn effectively. John Watson popularized the behaviorist theory of psychology. In 1913, he gave a speech in which he said that behaviorism was a purely objective experimental branch of natural science, and stated that its theoretical goal is the prediction and control of behavior, and that it does not involve introspection nor interpretation. In 1923, Sigmund Freud wrote his famous book, The Ego and the Id, which described his theory about the psychic structure of the mind. This was a huge departure from John Watson's behaviorist theories that denied the value of introspection. He He helped to establish the discipline of psychotherapy. In 1938, B.F. Skinner wrote his book, The Behavior of Organisms. Called a radical behaviorist by some, he considered free will to be an illusion. He's also known as the father of operant conditioning. Operant conditioning included the now famous concept of reinforcement, which stated that if the consequences to an action are bad, there is a high chance the action will not be repeated. And if the consequences are good, the probability of the action being repeated becomes stronger. In 1943, Abraham Maslow wrote his famous paper describing a hierarchy of needs, which included basic human needs such as safety, food, and water, psychological needs such as love, and self-actualization, which is a state where people are fulfilling their full potential. In 1953, Albert Ellis developed the earliest form of cognitive behavioral therapy, which he referred to as REBT, which stands for Rational Emotive Behavioral Therapy. It takes the position that people have illogical beliefs about their lives and that they can learn to challenge these illogical beliefs. In 1998, Martin Seligman developed a new branch of psychology called positive psychology, which is concerned with eudaimonia, a Greek word commonly translated as welfare or prosperity. He emphasized the positive aspects of the human experience that make life worth living for both individuals and society as a whole. In 2018, Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist from Canada, wrote a best-selling book called 12 Rules for Life. His book emphasizes responsibility and moral behavior. Some examples of his rules include: treat yourself like you're someone you are responsible for helping. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world, and tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Thanks everyone for watching my latest video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.